Venezuela is going through its dark night of the soul for a long time now. Darkness is merely the absence of light. To dispel darkness, we need to shine the light of consciousness into the dark, unconscious aspects of our being that sometimes we are unaware even exists. A shift in perspective is required now more than ever to understand the gravity of the matter. The government of any country reflects the mass mind of its people because the government is made up of nothing but people only. Any government is run not just by one person, such as the president or the prime minister, but supported by a mass of people in carrying out its atrocities or generosities. Let's take the example of Hitler. Although he was the bad guy in the history of Second World War, what he did was approved of and supported by hundreds of thousands of like-minded individuals who strengthened his dictatorship. The Hitler Holocaust was a reflection of a collective consciousness of fear and powerlessness. People literally experienced a loss of personal power at individual levels, which reverberated as massive beams of fear at a collective level. And that is precisely what gave him the power over them to commit massive atrocities and human genocide. He was a product of mass consciousness. Life is run by consciousness, not by societies or governments. Societies and governments are mere reflections of mass mind. The law of attraction, which governs life on earth, states that like attracts like. If we look at it from an energetic perspective, vibrations of a particular frequency attract similar vibrations. If a mass of population in fear and powerlessness continually engage in self-abandoning behavior by giving away their power to the government, then that government eventually becomes more powerful than its people and crime begins. One begets the other. Be it at a macrocosm or microcosm level, it is always the same dynamics that causes war and conflict among people, in relationships at personal or collective levels. Let's say a woman engages in overgiving, people-pleasing, self-abandoning behavior. She will inevitably attract narcissists as partners in relationships who will keep taking and taking from her until she is drained and depleted. She may not realize it is her unbalanced consciousness giving power to that narcissist. She may complain of her partner being mean and cruel, but at a higher level of the soul, this is happening in order to awaken her. Life informs life, about life, through life. He is giving her feedback of her own consciousness, which is vibrating at a level of helplessness. And this is happening so she can awaken to herself, take back her power, raise her consciousness, unleash her own divinity, so she can use the feedback to create healthier relationships with herself and with others, where power is equally shared, where there is a balance of give and take, where her energies can be replenished and reciprocated. Similarly, in life, everything is dictated by relationships, be it at a societal, political, governmental, cultural, or familial level. Nothing can exist without a relationship with something or someone. Understanding this is the beginning of awakening. People can experience powerlessness in their personal relationships or with regards to their government. Consciousness is not a fixed thing with defined characteristics. It is a current of ebb and flow, like the ever-moving ocean, and its vibrations can be adjusted depending on what we are experiencing, whether it is likable or not, and using that as feedback to alter our vibrations and produce a more desired reality. Knowing this is freedom, the basis of all awareness. And so, although these atrocities by governments on their people may look like a one-way street on the exterior, it is essentially a two-way street. Let me explain this better with a metaphor. When you see a river or stream flowing through the Earth's terrain, you conclude that the river is populated by glaciers and lakes up in the mountains whence it birthed. The glaciers melt and gravity brings the water down through the Earth's surface, forming lakes, rivers, ponds, and other inlets of water bodies. It's a one-way street, yes. Gravity can only bring things down, not push things up, right? But your thinking is limited when you see it that way. When a river or lake dries up in the ground due to, let's say, industrialization in any particular area, it also affects the glaciers and lakes up there in the mountains that populate the river water. How? Through evaporation, condensation, cloud formation, as water droplets rise from the ground into the air, then rain over the glaciers and lakes up in the mountains. Thus, it's a two-way street. Drying up of rivers can affect the quality of water found up in the mountains and vice versa. Similarly, governments reflect the collective consciousness of the people they represent. That collective consciousness is somewhat like an average of the individual consciousness of the people forming a society. The collective or mass consciousness can be higher or lower than any particular individual's consciousness, depending on how much one is evolved. And that is a variable. Hence, there is hope. Empowering any nation is in the hands of its people. The collective will change when more individuals awaken to themselves and reclaim their personal power, which they have unconsciously given away to their governments. And believe me, that is a smaller number than you imagine. To reach a critical mass, it's not necessary for 90% of the people to change. Not even 50%. The tipping point can be achieved at a mere 10%. Yes, that's right. When 10% of the population holds an unshakable belief, the majority of the society will eventually adopt it. That is the point where the threshold is achieved. If 10% of inhabitants awaken, it can change the entire constitution of the country. According to Malcolm Gladwell, the tipping point is that magic moment when an idea, trend, or social behavior crosses a threshold, tips, and spreads like wildfire. Think of it this way. It only takes one sick person to start a flu epidemic. And so, when as few as 10% of people at an individual level raise their consciousness, it will eventually reflect in the mass mind, also known as the government. So, how can people play a role in changing its government? By empowering themselves at an individual level and, essentially speaking, not giving away their personal power, be it in their relationships with each other or with their government, in the work they do, in the lifestyles they lead, in the programming they believe, etc. And how can people empower themselves at a personal level? Well, this is the tricky part because there may be many belief systems, cultural conditioning, societal patterns that are sabotaging the individual's efforts. Let me explain. When I lived in Venezuela back in 2009, I sensed this collective disempowerment at a massive level. I have changed so many countries and places in my short lifespan that by now I can sense the collective energy of any country within a few days of living there. As a child, I was always fascinated by that exotic name, Venezuela. Little did I know then that one day I would land up in that very country. But Venezuela was nothing like what I had imagined. From the moment I set foot there, I was gripped with fear. Stories of crime, violence, drugs, murder, kidnap, robbery, rape were everywhere. Everyone I met told me different versions of the same story about how dangerous the place was. You should have gone to Colombia, some told me. Teacher, why on earth did you choose to come to a country like Venezuela? I worked as an ESL teacher there on a foreign internship, and my students often posed such questions to me. I don't know why I went there, but it seemed to me that nobody felt safe in their own country. It was not their fault. Everyone was absorbed with the same fear of losing their lives at the hands of a stranger with a gun. That's all it took to subjugate people. Just show a gun and you have power. Even if you are more afraid than they are, you control. Because the fear of death can be so real. And some obtuse men with guns had managed to grip an entire nation in terror. Venezuela is one of the most beautiful countries I have ever seen. But it was hard to find a middle class civilian taking a nice evening walk on the streets of Maracaibo, where I lived. Everybody I met only told me how unsafe the country was. I jokingly called it the 3 C's: crime, climate, Chavez. Maracaibo was very hot, so people either complained about crime or the climate or President Chavez. Although people didn't like the situation, they didn't know how to change it. It seemed like the Chavez regime would never end. My students told me the elections were rigged and it would be impossible to have a different government until Chavez actually died. Well, I had left Venezuela after 2 years there and moved on to Costa Rica on yet another internship. When one day a Venezuelan student in my class told me he wouldn't be able to write the exams as he was traveling to his country to vote. Why? Is Chavez dead? I asked jokingly. Yes, teacher, Jesus replied. I was shocked. I hadn't been up to date with the news. But I was happy for the Venezuelans, especially my former students who wanted the Chavez regime to end so badly. I thought, now the country finally has a chance to recover and recuperate. But what followed took us all aback as a worse government came in place. People selected a leader that was soon going to make their lives a living hell. It was so painful to hear about the mass massacre, scarcity of food and medicine, and all the atrocity being committed upon its people that they literally had to flee their own country and seek refuge elsewhere with hopes of a better future. I loved my students and I was pained to hear about their untold suffering. The Maduro regime seemed to have left the civilians with absolutely no hope. My student Jesus never came back to class. To date, I'm not sure what happened to him, if he decided to move back to Venezuela or quit English classes or came back to Costa Rica later or experienced something terrible in his country. I can only speculate about the possibilities. Why did this happen? When I reflect on it, I know at a spiritual level, Venezuela became a vibrational match to it. Changing clothes does not change the person wearing them. Changing presidents doesn't solve the underlying problems of the country. The problem lies in the mass consciousness of its people. And all their complaining actually renders power to the very things they fear. It is time for Venezuelans to wake up as a collective. They have to awaken to themselves, reclaim their personal power, which they have unknowingly given away to their government, and become who they were meant to be. The process of life actualizes you. The evolutionary process waits for no one. and no one's belief systems or cultural ideologies. So, how do people give away their power? A lot of it has to do with the culture of the country, the way the society is structured, and its belief systems. Let's start with the better half of its population, women. As a child, I used to watch beauty pageants, and almost always Miss Venezuela was in the top 5, if not winning the crown several times. I grew up with the assumption the country is filled with beautiful women. Well, indeed, Venezuelan women are very beautiful with exotic features and figures. But what was revealed to me when I was in the country left me in utter shock of an entire culture mired in so much dysfunction, disempowerment, and debilitating conditioning that it's downright crazy. When I went clothes shopping there, I was appalled to see these larger than life sized mannequins with exaggerated figures that reflected the beauty parameters for young girls in the country. Every teen girl growing up wants to achieve those statistics because they do not feel adequate in their own assets. I am not exaggerating here when I tell you that every second girl on the street has a breast implant or some other form of figure and feature correction, be it through plastic surgery, liposuction, laser carved bodies, etc. It is often gifted to them by their own parents on their 15th birthday anniversary, called quinceañera, as they step onto adulthood, or more precisely, womanhood. It stunned me to see an entire nation swept by a culture of inadequacy and brainwashing. It is so rampant that people talk about their surgeries openly and with pride. Even low-income households, such as domestic maids, prioritize surgery over household expenses. It augments their self-esteem, they say, in a society that has no idea what that term even means. It is such a pity that women have to butcher their own bodies in order to feel adequate. Sadly, life has come to this state where people have started loving plastic. Worse still, their self-esteem is derived out of plastic. Now you might ask, what has women undergoing cosmetic surgery anything to do with the nation's dysfunctional government? Well, everything. Think about it. What are those women teaching their children? What are their sons learning about the feminine gender? What is a daughter learning? That she is not enough? That her body is not good enough? That she has to go under the knife, implant artificial objects inside her body at the risk of her own life so as to feel good about herself or be sufficient for a man? What is the quality of that relationship? Is there any real depth, bonding, intimacy in such connections, or is it just based on how well her body is shaped? How is power distributed in such relationships? What is the energy dynamic of the masculine feminine consciousness playing out at a macro level? What kind of generation is this producing? What belief systems is this creating? What inner sentiments drive a young girl to do such things to herself? At what level of consciousness is this happening? Is it a reflection of evolved or unevolved consciousness? Does any of this matter? It should, you know. The problem is that women there don't even realize they are part of the problem. It is a pride thing for them to show off their newly acquired assets. All she is obsessed with is her looks. There is not much intellectual capacity, but more of superficiality in such vain countries. Venezuelan women are naturally beautiful in their own skin. They don't need that external augmentation. But who will tell them that? Their mothers don't tell them. Their fathers pay for the boob job. Their boyfriends admire the artificial assets. It's an entire culture of vanity. There was no awareness, no consciousness, just so much shallowness. Like they were out of alignment with themselves, out of tune with their inner being. In such cultures of extreme dysfunction, how do you expect its government to be any better? The collective can only change when the individual changes. The people who make up the government grew up in those same households under similar cultural conditioning with families of likely mindsets. Who will teach them about self empowerment? In other patriarchal societies, such as parts of Africa, Asia, and the Middle East, men often force women to give away their personal power. But here, women willingly objectify themselves, undergo these physical rearrangements in order to be more desirable and acceptable in society. So, I cannot even talk about women's rights here. It is an entire nation of disempowered women. That is half the population of the country. And when women aren't empowered, how will men be empowered? There is bound to be dysfunctional patterns, power imbalances at personal and collective levels. The yin and yang energies must be balanced in order for harmony to reign in any society. The masculine and feminine energies are like two pillars erected at the two poles of the earth, balancing the duality of our existence. Dominance or submission of any one of the polarities will topple the balance in relationships and power struggles will prevail. We are not isolating individual bodies such as the government or military or public here. We are talking in terms of vibration and frequency, consciousness and energy. Consciousness is like a tapestry. If there is a hole at one corner of the fabric that is not mended in time, eventually it will destroy the entire framework of that tapestry. The most effective way to help a society is to empower its women. When you help women spend your money in their emancipation, those women will teach the children, take care of the community, the men, the government, and the society. Women are the real change makers, the center of any economy, the primary keepers of a society. Supporting their dignity and well being will enhance the quality of life in any society. We need more women leaders in all walks of life. The masculine systems of competition, conquest, and covetousness aren't working anymore. Those structures are crumbling owing to severe power imbalances. I noticed this dysfunction in other areas of lifestyle as well, such as nutrition and entertainment. Venezuela has perhaps the worst diet compared to any country I have visited thus far. Their food primarily consists of red meat, lots of cheese, sugar, and fried food. It's unbelievable how much meat one consumes. Meat for breakfast, meat for lunch, meat for snacks, meat for supper. Gosh, I was always constipated there. And they were proud of their diet. It's called culture. Having grown up consuming loads of varieties of vegetables as main dishes in my own country, I was surprised to find their only vegetable intake was limited to a meager salad as a side dish. When I told them how nutritionally poor their diet was, they got cross. So much fat consumption weighs heavy upon the liver, kidneys, heart, brain, and other internal organs. All the liposuction cannot melt away these unhealthy animal fats lining cells, causing severe acidic states in the body, the breeding ground of illnesses. Our bodies are healthier in alkaline states. We are what we eat. Food is energy. What we put into the body directly impacts our consciousness. Then their sense of entertainment is defined by lots of drinking, smoking, partying at nightclubs, and making out with random strangers. Such unhealthy lifestyles impact everything: their thinking and rationalizing capacity, their ideas and mental states, their livelihoods and social behavior, their inner sentiments and levels of awareness, etc. I found myself unable to carry out a normal conversation with people there, as the breadth of our chats were so severely restricted. I felt this lack of intellectual stimulation in the country. While I noted other Latin American societies were also like this, Venezuela is extreme in every sense. I am merely making observations to highlight the issues, not passing any judgments or criticisms here. Venezuela is a beautiful country with such exotic people, and yet its collective consciousness reflects so much dysfunction. While the people are beautiful with magnanimous hearts and kind spirits, that is not enough to create a healthy society. A healthy society is nurtured by healthy people with healthy habits, practices, cultures, beliefs, and mindsets. That said, I must admit I met some of the most interesting people during my tenure there with very high levels of individual consciousness. There are areas in the country, such as the Grand Savannah Highlands, the nearby town of Santa Elena, Canaima rainforests amidst the Amazonian jungles, the pristine beaches and mountains, and other such spots with vortices of energy that can recharge and rejuvenate anyone, raising their vibrations instantly. I am sure there are many shamans working to elevate the collective energy of the country. Again, you may ask, what has food and lifestyle got to do with the government? The connection isn't obvious at first, but remember the river metaphor discussed above? Everything is connected. A drop of water in your body today could have been the river yesterday, the glacier the day before, or the cloud that rained the day before that. The present government is just reflecting a collective dysfunction at many levels. This is not just an economic crisis, but also a spiritual one. And it will change when more people empower themselves from within, establish connection with their higher selves, find their life purpose and passion, enjoy their own company, take pride in their bodies without the need to rearrange it artificially, and act from that state of inner power. When more people are empowered this way, it can reach critical mass, the threshold at which change occurs. People have already started taking back their power in myriad ways through continual protests, marches, demonstrations over the years, with the opposition trying to oust the government. Millions have fled the country since Maduro came into power, seeking political asylum in neighboring South and North American countries such as Colombia, Brazil, Chile, Argentina, Ecuador, Peru, Costa Rica, Mexico, USA, Canada, etc. These acts definitely weaken the government. Nonetheless, everyone cannot leave the country. It is the whole, the collective, that needs healing, not just one aspect like the government. We often try to solve our problems where it surfaces. However, every problem stems from deeper roots of dysfunctional patterns in society. Blaming the government or complaining about the president will not help. This only creates more energy of powerlessness. The place to start is always within. When something perceived as bad happens, it is essentially a feedback from life that something in our consciousness is hurting. At a higher level of the soul, it is manifesting for the good of all. So things can change for the better. When you can see things this way, your perspectives will shift and your life will transform. You won't be agitated and restless with all the darkness around you. Rather, you'll move through the challenges gracefully, Life is giving you a chance to awaken to yourself, to express and experience who you really are, to enjoy and own your own divinity. Each individual is responsible for their own inner growth and development. World peace is an inside thing. Security is an inner job. One must trust in the protective presence and guidance of the universe. That is called faith. Life happens to you, through the filters of your own perception. Life is responding to you at all times. These emotions, these feelings of restlessness and dissatisfaction are symptoms of the awakening to a new stage in evolution of its people. In my very first month there, I was robbed at gunpoint outside the biggest shopping mall in Maracaibo in broad daylight. More than being robbed, what surprised me was that the crime happened in front of hundreds of onlookers who found themselves too powerless to do anything about it. You see, this is the problem. People believe they are helpless, and so they become. Energetically, they give away their power. Beliefs sponsor reality. What is the power of a few people with guns in front of a mass of people with no weapons? People don't realize that there is power in numbers. Because the problem here is that the organized are not civilized and the civilized are not organized. Real change begins with self-love, self-compassion, self-acceptance, self-approval, and self-empowerment. That is the path to self-realization. We come here on earth to self-actualize, to experience ourselves as an expression of divinity. The goodness of the universe is not limited. When something looks as if it is not working, do not agonize, because something better is on its way. It is time for Venezuelans to reclaim their power by first empowering themselves from within, learning to love themselves for who they are and not what society wants them to be, and making all their life choices from that space of self-love. When more people have done this inner work and raised their consciousness at an individual level, it will have reached the 10% to effect change in the country and in its government. This is a call for the civilians to be empowered and evolved. The oppression is waking them up to their own power, and growth is happening at a spiritual level, slowly but surely. Big changes don't happen overnight. It is during our darkest times we grow the most. Suffering is the fastest way to awakening, to enlightenment. It breaks you open. It makes you develop compassion or co-passion for fellow humans. The capacity to feel the pain and suffering of another. It makes us better humans. It makes us aware of the fact that we are not separate. We are one interconnected species. This is the awakening of the Venezuelan people, an inner journey to reclaim what is theirs. When more people realize their power, things will shift. And then the government too will reflect that elevated state of consciousness. But until then, lives will be shed. Livelihoods will be destroyed. Massacres will continue. Belief systems will purge before the collective wakes up. Just like a storm destroys everything on its path. Houses are wrecked. Edifices are damaged. Roads are flooded. Huge structures are brought down, but not before washing away the dirt and debris as an unusual calm descends upon the place, leaving it rejuvenated and refreshed, as if reborn.